this is not a trend. This is not a protest. This is a global escape. And the strangest part? It's not starting in Washington. It's starting at the checkout line. In airports. In the smallest, quietest decision a person can make. I'm not going. I'm not buying. I'm out. And if you think this is just about Trump's tweets or America's foreign policy, you've already missed the plot twist. Because right now, from Canada to Germany, from Latin America to Asia and Africa, something massive is forming. Not a march, not a movement, something colder, something deeper, a behavior, a pattern. A rupture. Watch this. The boycott is real. But it's not loud. It doesn't wave signs or shout into microphones. It simply disappears. People not showing up. Tourists not booking. Buyers not clicking. The world saying, no. Thanks. And here's the part that should make every leader panic when people stop showing up. Power doesn't collapse in a boom. It fades in silence. Notice that, because what's happening now isn't symbolic. It's systemic. It's a shift in trust, in movement, in how the world responds to a country it once followed without question. And when that trust breaks, the first thing that falls isn't a headline, it's the economy. Travel slows. Prices rise. Exports stall. Jobs vanish. Influence evaporates. But here's the twist. The most dangerous thing for a man like Trump isn't being criticized. It's being ignored. And that's exactly what's beginning to happen. Not with rage, but with distance. So if you think this is just a hashtag, stay with me. Because what you're about to see isn't just rejection. It's redesign. And by the time we get to the final scene, the question won't be, what did Trump say? But does the world still need America at all? It started with a smirk. A headline. A throwaway line from Trump, calling Canada the 51st state. A joke, maybe. A jab. But something shifted. Because what came back from Canada wasn't a press conference. It wasn't outrage. It was nothing. No fire, no fury. Tourists stopped booking. Families postponed trips. Shelves in Canadian stores slowly, silently began replacing American goods with alternatives. No speeches, no campaigns. Just a quiet exhale and then absence. Watch this. This wasn't Canada protesting. This was Canada unplugging. Elbows up, wallets closed, and passports pointed elsewhere. They didn't argue. They simply didn't arrive. And here's the twist. It worked. According to multiple reports, the U.S. saw a measurable dip in tourism revenue from Canada during that period. American products, once dominant in Canadian retail, lost shelf space and sales volume. Local media barely had to say a word. The message had already landed. Not with fury. With behavior. Notice what that means. Canada didn't retaliate with threats. It didn't fire back with insults or policy. It didn't try to win the argument. It left the room. And when a country walks away from another, not just diplomatically but economically, socially, emotionally, that's not a protest. That's a fracture. And that fracture didn't stay north of the border, because what the world saw wasn't noise. It was success. And that success became the signal. If Canada could step back and see results, why couldn't others? This is the part Trump never saw coming. He thought the danger was in being hated. But it's not. The danger is in becoming irrelevant. Canada's move wasn't loud. But it was contagious. And now, the silence is spreading. Not as a campaign. As a habit. Reset. Because once behavior becomes habit, it doesn't need hashtags. It doesn't need headlines. It repeats itself quietly, relentlessly, globally. And that's what makes it lethal. So when Canada didn't clap back, didn't protest, didn't rage, the world took notes. And what started with a smirk may have just triggered the opening shot of a global boycott that doesn't scream. It vanishes. And that's louder than anything Trump has ever tweeted. At first, it looked small. A headline buried in the international section. A startup in Denmark releases a simple app. Scan the barcode of any product, and it tells you if that product is connected to the United States. It didn't make noise. It didn't trend. But something about it landed like a cold wind. Within days, the app exploded. It climbed the charts. Not in entertainment, not in lifestyle, but in utility. It became one of the most downloaded apps in the country. Not because it was fun, but because it was useful. Because people weren't just angry, they were reorganizing how they spent, how they consumed, how they moved. Watch this. This wasn't outrage. This was architecture. People weren't posting memes. They were scanning peanut butter, rethinking sneakers, reading labels on wine bottles, adjusting their everyday lives to quietly step away from anything with a Made in USA tag. And here's the part that makes it dangerous. It wasn't about Trump. Not directly. It was about trust, about control, about fear disguised as data. Because the app didn't scream boycott. It didn't even ask for attention. It simply gave people the tools to walk away one silent purchase at a time. Notice what that means. When protest becomes software, it stops being temporary. It becomes structure. It embeds into behavior. It turns from politics into reflex. And Denmark wasn't alone for long. In Germany, the conversation shifted quickly. A well-known football executive, OK Gottlich, stood in front of microphones and cameras and dropped a line that hit like thunder. Maybe it's time to boycott the 2026 World Cup. One sentence. No hashtags. No movement. Just a spark. And the spark caught flame. Suddenly, it wasn't about whether you liked Trump. It was about whether it was still safe, still smart, still ethical to support, visit, or fund anything tied to the United States under his leadership. The app? A symbol. The sentiment. Viral. Reset. Because once you give people a tool, you don't need to give them a reason. They'll find it. And when a tool becomes habit, no one argues. They just scan and skip. That's what Denmark created. Not a protest, a portal. And now, that portal is open everywhere. Picture this. 2 leaders. 2 stages. 1 global forum. Davos. On one side, Prime Minister Carney. Calm. Measured. Sharp like a scalpel. He speaks of sovereignty. Multilateralism. Trade built on mutual respect. His words land like anchors. The room stands. Applauds. Not just out of courtesy, out of relief. On the other side, Trump. Red-faced. Ad-libbing. Confused. He rants about Greenland. He praises Iceland, then confuses it for Greenland. He mocks NATO. Calls America's allies freeloaders. And then he laughs. But no one else does. CBC puts the 2 speeches side by side. The contrast isn't just embarrassing, it's radioactive. Watch this. Carney says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Trump says, Canada lives because of the United States. They should be grateful. Carney builds alliances. Trump breaks them. Carney draws maps. Trump draws lines in the sand. And here's where it fractures. The world listens to both. And then chooses who sounds like the future. Notice the shift. It's not about charisma. It's about coherence. One leader offers strategy. The other offers mood swings. One speaks of global order. The other demands loyalty with the tone of a mafia boss. Reset. Because Davos wasn't a stage. It was a mirror. And when the world looked in, it didn't just see 2 speeches. It saw a fork in the road. One path forward. One path inward. And in the days that followed, something happened. China invited Carney to deepen trade ties. European leaders held quiet side meetings. A new bloc began to take shape. Not with loud declarations, with logistics, investment, policy. A world slowly rerouting away from a man who once led the stage. Davos was not a moment. It was a diagnosis. And when a country begins losing the room not from attack, but from comparison, the next step is not confrontation, it's replacement. And that's exactly what started that week. At some point, anger becomes irrelevant. What matters is the money. The real kind. The kind you can measure in spreadsheets, in cancelled flights, in empty hotel rooms. That's the part no one can ignore, not even the ones who pretend this is all just noise. Because something is breaking. Quietly. Consistently. And now, undeniably, the data is showing it before the headlines ever will. Tourism to the United States isn't just down, it's bleeding. Not because of a global disaster. Not because of a war, but because people are choosing to stay away. No signs, no speeches, just silence. And silence is expensive. Watch this. Economists are watching a slow erosion. A 9-digit hole forming under the surface. Over $90 billion predicted to vanish from tourism this year alone. Not speculation. Not theory. Just subtraction. You can see it in the rooms that were never booked. In the tour packages quietly redirected elsewhere. In the flight paths no longer offered. And behind every lost ticket is a job. A business, a future that no longer fits the plan. Whiskey, bourbon, the pride of Americana, sitting longer on foreign shelves. Not banned, just bypassed. Canadian shoppers reaching for something else. European distributors reconsidering stock. No one saying a word. Just shifting. Quietly, permanently. Notice that. Because once the market begins to rewire, emotion no longer matters. It's not about how loud the boycott is, it's about how natural it starts to feel. Like instinct. Like a reflex. People make new plans, find new brands, book new destinations, and when that behavior embeds, even the best diplomacy won't bring them back. Reset. This isn't a message anymore. It's momentum. Canada isn't sending warnings, it's redirecting commerce. Airlines aren't debating politics, they're cutting routes. Tourists aren't angry, they're just gone. And while officials talk about perception, balance sheets are showing loss. The kind that's too big to spin and too deep to patch. A 0.3% drop in GDP might not sound like much. Until you realize it's not just one industry. It's not one region. It's systemic. And here's the irony that stings most. Trump tried to sell strength, but what the world saw was risk. And risk doesn't provoke a fight. It provokes withdrawal. That's what makes this boycott different. Not loud, not dramatic, just everywhere. And once that kind of shift begins, it doesn't reverse. It compounds. One quiet decision at a time. By the time you realize they're gone, they already left a long time ago. At first, it was anger. Fury at the rhetoric, at the insults, at the threats. But something shifted. The temperature dropped. And in its place came something far more dangerous. Fear, not the kind you protest. The kind that makes you stay home. It started with whispers in news reports. Then it showed up in international editorials. ICE agents compared to secret police. Border Patrol painted as militarized enforcers. The kind of language once reserved for dystopian novels now showing up in travel warnings. And then came a name. Alex Jeffrey Pretty. A nurse. An ICU worker from Minneapolis. Killed. Labeled a threat. Marked online. Then buried. Without justice. That name didn't go viral for fame. It went viral as a signal. A message whispered across borders. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. Watch this. Because this is the moment the boycott stopped being political. It became personal. People who once planned vacations now questioned their safety. Families who once sent students abroad paused. Journalists reframed their stories, not around policy, but risk. The image of America wasn't just fractured, it was radioactive. Notice the change. No one's arguing anymore. They're calculating. And when a country becomes a calculation, it's already lost the room. Reset. Because fear doesn't march. It avoids. It reroutes. It erases plans without announcing them. And once people begin to feel that crossing a border could cost them their dignity or their life, they don't need ideology to turn away. They need instinct. That's what's happening now. The boycott isn't a protest sign. It's a survival strategy. And the world is adjusting not with fire, but with absence. Quiet. Chilling. Permanent. You don't need to hear them say, "We're not coming." You just need to notice they're not there. There are moments the world doesn't just watch. It decides. Moments where attendance isn't about tickets, it's about allegiance. The 2026 World Cup is shaping up to be one of them. On paper, it's everything America wants to project: prestige, passion, power. The biggest sporting event on the planet. A chance to welcome the world. To remind everyone who's still in charge. But there's a problem. The world may not show up, not because of scheduling, not because of costs, but because of something deeper. A pulse shift, a fear that has been growing quietly, beneath headlines and hashtags, now crawling into conversations between fans, coaches, families. Is it worth it? Watch this. In Germany, it didn't come from an activist. It came from Oke Göttlich, a senior figure in football. Grounded, respected. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He just asked, "Maybe it's time to think about a boycott." And then added, "For me, the time has come." That sentence hit like thunder. Because it wasn't just opinion, it was calculation. Notice what's shifting. The World Cup is no longer seen as neutral. It's no longer immune. The narrative around it is now laced with warnings of ICE, of border patrol, of discrimination, of unpredictability. Fans aren't just worried about losing a match. They're worried about losing themselves in a place that feels increasingly foreign. Reset. Because when football, the most universal celebration of unity, begins to feel like a risk, the issue isn't sport, it's stability. And no stadium, no sponsor, no anthem can fix that. What's unfolding is bigger than one tournament. It's a referendum. A mirror held up to a host nation asking, "Are you still a place the world wants to gather in?" And if the answer is no, it won't be just seats left empty. It'll be trust, investment, presence. The very things that make a host powerful in the first place. The test has already begun. And right now, the scoreboard isn't looking good. It doesn't end with a protest. It ends with a pattern. That's what this moment feels like. Not a spike in outrage, but a quiet, steady drift. One that doesn't reverse. Because when a boycott becomes a habit, it no longer needs banners or slogans. It just becomes the default. And that's the danger. Because now, the world isn't reacting. It's adjusting. The shopping cart changes. The booking disappears. The product sits untouched. And there's no press release. No fight. Just absence. Watch this. Denmark scans its labels. Canada skips the flight. Germany questions the World Cup. These are not isolated moves. They're echoes. Signals that trust has left the room, not in rage, but in rhythm. Notice how it lands. Once, America was the center. Now, it's a question. Once, leadership was followed. Now, it's fact-checked by behavior. And when behavior moves, economies shift. Borders tighten. Influence dissolves. Reset. Because what's collapsing isn't popularity, it's relevance. And here's the most uncomfortable truth. The world isn't debating America. It's replacing it. Not with a declaration, but with a shrug. Not with fire, but with forgetting. As someone observing this across continents and platforms, what strikes me most isn't the noise, it's the precision. The strategy behind the silence. The way entire populations are choosing not to confront, but to redirect. The world isn't angry. It's adapting. And that's far harder to fix. So the question is no longer, who disagrees with America? The real question is, who still needs it? And if that answer keeps shrinking, the headlines won't say collapse. But the market, the map, the movement, they will. This isn't about hate. It's about consequences. About how power isn't taken, it's withdrawn. Slowly, patiently, without fanfare, and that's why this story matters. Because recovery from anger is possible, but recovery from irrelevance, that may take generations. Disclaimer: this content is an independent commentary based on public sources, news coverage, and real-time discourse. It does not endorse or encourage any specific boycott, nor does it promote hostility toward any nation or people. The goal is to examine shifting global behaviors and their implications. Viewer discretion is advised when interpreting subjective elements.